Hello everyone, and welcome to my two-part series on building Michael Wittmann's Kursk Tiger. I will be using Cyber Hobby 9142, the Orange Box Tiger, and workable AFV Club tracks for this. When I started this project, I started looking at references of tigers of Michael's company at Kursk. Now, there were 3 platoons in that company, and the first ones I looked at were first platoon, like this tiger here. So I got a little bit excited because I thought, hey, I can put the numbers on the side of the turret and not have to worry about the vision slot where because the extra tracks would push the numbers forward. And then this tank also has an earlier sprocket. It was kind of more interesting than normally you see Wittmann's Tiger. So I started talking with David Byrden, and it ends up that the common conception is that Wittmann's tank would be one of the 5 delivered in April to 3rd platoon, which all had spare tracks in the turret, a loader's periscope on the roof, later sprockets. One of them that there's a picture of had earlier Feifels, but most had late. So they were all pretty much the same. So what I'm going to use as the basis for this is other 3rd platoon tigers, because there's no picture of Wittmann's actual tiger. So you basically just have to base what you do on the closest thing you can find, which in this case would be the other tigers delivered at that same time. So starting off with the idler's real simple 2-piece assemblies. Normally I would use thicker glue to glue these hull plates on, but in this case I just went with extra thin. I really didn't like this assembly because I had to scrape off the hinge detail that was there and glue on these frames. One was bent and it was very unclear. I'd never done this type before. So the frames went on alright. The exhaust, I ended up using the wrong one, actually. So technically mine has late exhaust with like the open hole in the top, no flapper. I put glue over the top of those little poke things because they shouldn't actually be there. It should just be these little pegs. So whenever they're on, then I put glue over the top to hopefully melt them in. I don't worry too much about the seams in the 2 parts of the exhaust, because you cover them with the armored covers. I did saturate the exhaust with extra thin later and stipple it to give it texture. I do like that in this kit it has a 1-piece assembly for this instead of 3 separate post pieces and then the top piece, because that's always really fiddly and they never seem to sit right. So this is very quick. Posts might be a little thick, and they still do sit incorrectly. They should be turned to where the top of the 5 points straight backwards. I know it didn't make much sense, but there's 5, and 1 should be perfectly straight back. I glue these on so that my airbrush doesn't shoot them across the room when I paint. So here's me trying to do the rear mud flaps, and I tried to do it on camera. I ended up having to go off and then finish it, so you see here they magically pop on, but I just could not get them to sit correctly. I think I messed up part of that frame bit. So in the end, they look okay. And now they're on. So that tool had clasps. 1 tool on the upper deck did, but the rest didn't. These fan assemblies I don't paint. I just build them and then slap them inside because I like the weight they add to the hull. And I like there to be something in the vents, but I don't necessarily care if it's painted because I don't know, I can't see it. So here I'm using Tamiya standard cement, pretty thick, to glue these side plates on. Then clamping them. Then I'm using extra thin to paint the seams between that plate and like the rear plate. And then while that one side is clamping, I'll paint the back side of the plate I glued previously. This jack builds up nicely, and it's a cool assembly, but it tends to get in my way when I install it before the Feifels filter. So my advice to anyone building these kits later, at least this one, would be to put this thing on after you put the Feifels filters on, because it got in my way. So I build it up about this much before I start putting it on the tank. There's a few pieces not ready yet, so then I glue these little kind of hook things that it sits on in. Then I glue the main part of the jack to that. Then I glue the arm to the jack so that I can swing it towards the hull. Then I glue the handle and the clasp to the rear hull, and then put glue on the two parts that will go together, and then kind of swing them together. That's how I get a sort of proper fit. Then I glue these C-clamp things on. I probably didn't need to do like the interior detail on this hatch because one of them was closed, but I did. Sometimes I do. So this one would be open. I didn't install a periscope on the closed one though. So here I glue the hinge and the hull, because there's a flat piece on a Tiger hatch, and that sits on the hull when it's open, so you know you can get the appropriate angle for it being open if you just glue that part down where it would sit. This little thing I'm gluing, which you can barely see, is meant to hold the engine hatch open to allow cooling. It's a very fiddly, tiny little thing. I don't know a better way to build it than how I just did, which looked like I was folding a paper crane. It's a fiddly little thing. This part of the Feifels system I thought went together really well. The rear part, not as much. They've updated a lot of these parts in their later Tigers. This stuff all dates from the purpose-built Cyber Hobby Wittmann kit, the one that I'm sort of emulating with this build. I think if you pay attention, you'll notice that I glue almost as little as possible, and that comes from just having disasters with old testers glue. So I always try to be as careful as I can be. Here I'm using the big standard cement with its brush to glue on the upper hull. And then I'll go around with extra thin and kind of paint over the seams, kind of like welding it. This, the engine deck, or engine hatch, I'll actually glue on with just extra thin, because I've had to pop it off more than once, so I actually glue it kind of less on purpose. Now the photo etch grills. I'm using Bob Smith Industries slow drying CA, I just I put some on like a little plastic cup and I just dab a toothpick in it. I usually only run it up 2 of the sides of the 4. So you see I'll go like left and right. That's in case I need to get underneath it to pop it off. And then here you will see that I noticed that the grill that I had done previously was crooked and I don't like it, so I basically get underneath it and turn the tweezers like a key and it'll pop off any PE that I don't like, at least grills. Smaller bits can be harder, you just have to get a hobby knife under them if you want to get them off, but... So apparently I didn't do a terribly good job on this MG34 for the bow, but you're not going to see it. I noticed that while watching this. I was like, oh, yeah, they glue that together very well. But all you ever see is the barrel, so it's really just in there for like a counterweight. Here I'm using the heavy cement again for the front plates, and then I'll hold that on, and then once that's like that, I run extra thin around the seam, again, sort of weld it together. Here I'm actually using the heavier cement with an extra thin brush because it can get into those areas. That was a little too tight, that fit, so it actually caused the mud flaps to sit a little bit strange. The headlights, I only showed one of on camera because it's pretty tough to film. I always sit there and kind of twist that little blackout spot to make sure it's right. I didn't film the conduit because that was the fiddliest thing about the entire build. It was really annoying. They didn't fit correctly and I had to trim them and stuff. Just little metal that came in the kit. There we have a crowbar. Now here's how I do the tools on this. This is the tool that comes in the kit and it has no clasps. I prefer the molded on ones like this. So how I've been doing this in the past is I will then cut the tool that I have, right? So and then I'll cut this one up too. And now I have the in-between size for how much should be in between the clasps. So I'll just glue that to the other tool. So then I'll have the correct size tool to fit in the original spot. Like, I know it's a very strange thing to do. It's very hack and slash. And I've actually never seen anyone else do it. But I'll do it like in a pinch because I'm not ready for PE clasps yet. So again, I'll show it here again. Well, in this one I just cut off the head of the hammer so it fits, and then sand down the handle, and then glue the exact same head back on. I just needed it to be able to fit in that spot. But in general, what I do is I cut up the tool that's meant for the kit. Like in this case, here we go. I'm cutting off the 2 parts, see? And then the lack of clasp is cut off. Then I find a clasp of some kind, and then I just glue that in place of the little nub. But on here, I actually had to glue the clasp to the hull first. Then glue the main part of the shovel to that clasp in the hull. And then this part. I know it's weird, but it actually looks pretty much perfect when it's done, if it's done right. If it's wrong, it's going to look really stupid. But it works for me. So I glued this little thing while putting it on a file like that, and then I can slide it inside the muzzle brake. Otherwise, I found that it was really crooked. Again, I'll glue over top of joints to try to melt them together. So this is the mantlet. That's a reinforced binocular sight mantlet. One of the photos that David Byrden said he thought could be 1331 had a Tiger P mantlet, and I had debated actually doing that. By the time we had that discussion, I'd already built this one up, and the 3-company Tiger at Kursk that had a Tiger P mantlet, you can't see what its number was, and it was knocked out. And as far as I'm aware Wittmann's Tiger was not that knocked out at Kursk, so I chose not to do the Tiger P mantlet. That Tiger also had early Feifels, so it would have changed the build quite a bit. This gun assembly is very, very solid. You know, the turret interior on these Dragon Tigers does lack a lot, but the stuff that's in there is really nice. This is the first time I'd done the older halves of a turret from the Tiger P kits, which is what this turret is, where that sprue comes from. Went together really well. It wasn't a problem. You know, I prefer those one-piece ones from the newer kits, but it's fine. You do have to glue in this little rib to hold in the escape hatch, and then you have these two options for the vision slits, because the upper one is a Tiger 1 and the lower one is a Tiger P. The escape hatch is workable if you make it that way. I just stuck it on. So the two turret halves going together, the fit was very, very good. So here's the turret roof. There's the periscope that I debated quite extensively. I actually made up an entire separate turret roof without the loader's periscope because I originally didn't want to do the side tracks. But it ended up that that just wasn't accurate, so now I have a spare built turret roof. Anyone who's really interested in Tigers, just always remember, if it has a loader's periscope, it has to have spare tracks on the turret. Or at least the mounting brackets for it. This little thing here is to prevent the loader's hatch from slamming. It's like a hydraulic-assisted close. It's pretty impressive for a 70-year-old tank to have something like that. Now this, I glued on the armored cover, or the deep weighting thing for the turret ventilator that would not be on a tank at Kursk. More than likely because that ventilator would suck out the fumes every time you fired the gun. If you had that armored cover on, it wouldn't work. So you kind of couldn't go into combat with that thing on, but I liked the look of it, so I left it. So this thing didn't quite fit, and then to make it look exactly correct, because there should be a little notch on each side of it, and I had to sand it a bit. So this is Ryfield's turret bin, and you can see that it has better molded on stuff than the Dragon one, and it wasn't used in the kit that I had, so I figured I'd use it for this. It builds up nearly identically to Dragons. A lot of their parts do, actually. But they're pretty detailed, pretty nice looking, so I used a few on this build. Anything left over from that DAT kit. You're able to glue on the basket without having the turret roof on. You can actually slide it underneath those things, so that's so I can paint the interior. The wheels for this kit are all attached 4 together, and they're meant to be left that way, but I just cut them apart like normal Tiger wheels because I couldn't abide that. They're a little less detailed than your standard dish wheels in a modern Tiger kits, but they look okay. These are the Feifel hoses. They were fiddly. I won't lie. They've redone all of this for 6730, the SO4 kit, and the Tiger 131 kit. So I've only now built these. I'll be curious to see how those newer ones go together. So, I did have to play around with this. I had to shave off that wing nut from the C-clamp on the jack to get that to fit right, but eventually I did get it to fit right. This side as well. You know, getting it on is one thing, getting it on and looking correct was a whole different thing. I would continuously go back and kind of touch it up. I put the toolbox on after the Feifels, though, to make sure that there was no interference between the Feifels and the box. These are the S-mine launchers. I hadn't done these before on any Tiger, so I was kind of excited to do that. This one went on really easily. The second one, not so much, because I'd opened that hatch and glued it that way. So I had to figure out a way to get it in there, so I stuck it on the end of a cocktail stick. Or, actually it's a... yeah, it's exactly what that is, I think. And then I would finally get it to sit correctly. I used the styrene tow cables, even though they have a late shape to them. I mean, the only reference I've ever seen of tow cables with that angular shape is in the Modeler's Guide to the Tiger Tank on later ones, which has to do with the arrangement of the clamps that hold them down in the rear. I didn't want to use metal because I didn't have any copper. I only had the Dragon Steel ones, and they fight me. And if I was going to do that, I should have clamped them down right away, and I didn't. So I just used these. If you glue these down to all the points like this, they work fine. Just don't try to hold them down with the plastic clasps and stuff and expect them not to move. You basically just got to glue them to where they sit. Like... so right there, I'll glue that, and on the top, and on all the rear clasps as well. Then I can glue in the barrel cleaning rods, and they'll actually sit right. These were very fiddly. I think, however, I fitted the Feifel hoses, they weren't quite correct, so I ended up shaving off this little nub on that piece there. You can't see it, but... and then they don't sit perfectly straight, but it's a tank in a war, so when things aren't perfectly straight, I don't really care. But here you can see me gluing again the cables down to the points where these little clasps get glued. And if you glue the cable to there, and then you glue that thing not only to the base of where it should be glued, but also glue that to the top of the cable, then you'll actually have it not ping off. But if you try to treat it like it's a real thing, like it's just holding a cable in place and you glue it where the contact points are, it'll pop off. These are the rear S-mine launchers. Now here I'm cutting the fenders. I always do this. I actually mangled a couple because my razor saw, if you can see, is not delicate. So I actually had to dig into an older kit. Luckily I have some spares because of certain kits I have metal ones, so I have spare styrene ones I can just borrow. But I always cut them into separate pieces. I tried to bend the corners, but I don't have like a good tool for that, and I always think it looks bad, so I'm a little too subtle with it, and so it ends up looking uniform where I bend all the corners, but it's okay. They look just janky enough, and then I always kind of try to stagger them where like one will sit a little higher than the other, just so they look a little crappy. Now this is the Ryfield shovel. I filled the other hole on the front plate and then sanded off Ryfield's peg because it wouldn't fit perfectly. This is for holding spare tracks. Clear parts I'm not a fan of. I don't glue many periscopes or vision blocks, but this has to do with the mass of the cupola, because the clear parts that I'm gluing on here are actually like the cases for the vision blocks of the cupola. So and because mine's going to be open, if I didn't build this assembly and install it, it would look bad. I did, however, kind of have a hard time fitting the cupola after it was in, so you glue this big clear assembly on. And then you glue the cupola on top of that. Didn't fit perfectly, but there is a seam on the real one because that cupola does just come off. So a lot of these handles on hatches and stuff, you'll see I'll glue them and then turn them into place. So I found that this assembly fit better if I glued the hatch on first and then glued the little bracket that holds it up correctly in between this little notch that holds it where it should be and the hatch. I'd never done it that way before, but it worked pretty well. And then just the final grab handle on the commander's hatch. Probably should have glued that on previously. This is the spare antenna tube. I always think I'm gluing that wrong because there's like not much contact points. So here we get into painting a little bit. Before I can button up the turret, I need to do a minimal amount of painting. So I'm going to prime the inside with black. The same as I do everything, just Tamiya XF1. And then the roof as well. It creates a teeny bit of problems for gluing, but not too much. Tamiya Extra Thin will eat right through the paint, but it'll get paint all over your glue. So this is a mixture of Tamiya flat white and buff, just to make it look a little bit egg-colored instead of white. So this is, you know, this is not a complicated interior, so that's all I did. Then I paint the seat frames Panzer Gray. Now I think this gray that I used was really dark, a little too dark. And then this is a mixture of, I want to say dark rubber and green. I was just trying to match the color of Bobbington's catch bag. Because I usually paint them brown, but I figured that this kind of dark greenish color seems more realistic with what I've seen. Then I button it up. I didn't even do a chipping pass or a wash or anything. I just wanted some color in there. Because I've done that in the past, and you never see any of it, so. These are Ryfield tracks. They're workable tracks, and I had some left over. So you glue the separate guide horns on with these sprue gates attached. Now, I did that with 7 tracks, now I moved on to these track hangers. Now, the tape is here to mark where they go because I used a separate turret roof than the one suggested in the kit because I didn't like the simplified detail. So I used their older stuff. The hangers were actually better on the new part, but it was like a one-piece thing, and then there was a seam in the weld, and I just didn't like it. So I had to mark where they should be. So then I glue on all the top hangers on both sides. There's 5 on one side and 2 on the other, unless you have a super early version of that, in which case there would be 3 on one side and 5 on the other. So, getting them in place, so I like them. So then now I went back to this, and I pop these off, and then I sand it. And by the way, this is how you do Ryfield's tracks, so I had to do this 96 times per side on the Ryfield build. So then I'm gluing this little piece here to the bottom of the track, and that's how it hooks on. So then I'll glue that top part of there, and that again, and then kind of just slide it on the right way on the side of the turret. So now I went back and I glued the rest of the tracks to have their lower connector. Now in real life this is a post, relatively short, that just fits through the pinhole, so it'll hold it in place. Then one by one I go around and I glue some glue on the 2 places where it'll connect, one on the top and one on the bottom. And then just try to slide it into place, and there's some fiddling around and moving it with tweezers and stuff to make sure that it sits right. On the later kits there'll be holes in the turret side to where those points should be, but I was just winging it with this one, so I wanted to make sure they looked right. Now these are the cut-off smoke launchers. They're pieces in the kit just to be the remove smoke launchers. Now apparently they would cut these off before Kursk because they could get hit by small arms fire and set off the smoke launcher, which would obscure your own tank and smoke, which is bad. Here are just some dragon parts to reinforce that turret basket. This is how I do tow cables. I am white gluing the tow cable points so that I can remove it later after I do the base coat. This is just basically so I can paint the brackets that hold the tow cable in place. Finally getting around to the sprockets, I decided with the late type I had made scratch built or hack and slash early ones, but ended up not using them. So these are AFV Club's workable tracks. What you're seeing is how they go together. There's one piece and then the piece with the two guide horns, and that pinches each previous track and then that makes them workable. You can get too much glue and they will not move. And the way you fix that is you just go down the track run one at a time, and then you grab one track run with the tweezers and you just, or a track link, and you just bend it back and forth until the glue gives way and it articulates again. So I sped this up as fast as I could, and I think sometimes you'll be able to see me stop and start just bending stuff, and that's what I do to make sure that the glue isn't going to set them in place. You can crank through this in a few hours. I was doing these pretty late at night, so I didn't go quite as fast as I would have liked, but compared to Ryfield's tracks or Model Caston, very quick. Now these early tracks from AFV Club are very articulate, you know, they move very nicely and are very easy to put together. Their lates are actually very different, don't move as well, and are harder to build. So if you're going to go AFV Club workable, go early. But as you can see, it is not slow. There's a lot to do. Now here I'm connecting the run. Now I do this right away. I connect it into one fully complete run. So then now I'm white gluing on the wheels. Only the two inner sections of wheels. So this single wheel and then the first row of doubles. I leave the other two sets of wheels off. Then I'm fitting it with the idler and the drive sprocket. Now I'll pull the idler back to make sure the tension is correct. Now I'm just making sure that it fits kind of how I want it to, and it does. So then I go to work on the second run. That's my method for even magic tracks. I'll build the entire run and then kind of pop them on with the sprockets and idlers and leave the wheels off. And sometimes that can get pretty difficult to pop the road wheels on when you do it that way, but that's how I do it. There I am trying to make sure that the tracks move. The later it got and the longer I did this for, the sloppier I got because I just wanted it to be over. So then this run was a lot less good, so I had to go back and work with it a lot to make sure it was workable. Again, we're putting wheels on. And then the outer wheels. That's micro crystal clear, by the way. I had no other use for it, so I started gluing wheels on with it. Now fitting the second track run on. And there it is, the build is finished. This is 1331 Wittmann's Kursk Tiger. Hopefully you enjoyed that, and you'll come back for part 2, which will be painting and weathering